So I didn't really publish it for fame and fortune, I guess, but more like for me to use it on my next project. For the longest time, so I always called it next-intl, but a fun fact about it is I always developed it in parallel with a plain React library, but quite wild pull request. It was open for, I think, close to a year or something, hundreds of commits, and I think more than 60 people commenting there. It was kind of insane, like by the end pressing that big green merge button. But
hello, Internet. Welcome back to the Code and Content Podcast, the podcast for conversations at the intersection of code and content. On today's episode, I have Jan, who is the lead maintainer and creator, really, of the next-intl package. It is the foremost way to do localization and internationalization, not just in Next.js, but any React application. He's just launched a course on how to use the library, and not just in isolation, but set it up in Next.js, add a content editor backend with Sanity, the content operating system, and a whole other bunch of features. This topic is a really tricky one to get through to because it is extremely important to massive enterprise organizations. They have to get this right, and yet it is so complex that a lot of people don't really like talking about it. So I was glad to go and get the expert. Jan seems to have stumbled into this as the expert, but he's doing an excellent job and had a really great conversation. Let's jump straight to it. Jan, thanks for joining me on the Code and Content Podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
All right. So you have recently launched a course on how to do internationalization with Next.js primarily. And that's because you are the core creator of, is it the most popular, I'm guessing, internationalization package for Next.js?
I guess you could call it the go-to solution for modern Next.js apps if they want to implement internationalization. I guess that's a fair statement.
Excellent. Well, that's a very nice marketing statement too. So it sounds like you've said that before. So first of all, what got you into internationalization? Because I know I've done an awful lot of work on the Sanity side of things for internationalization, localization. And it's not a very fun topic, and there's not a lot of people who seem to be like clamoring for it. But when it comes to actually needing to internationalize content, like it's super, super important. So it feels like the most important thing that a lot of people ignore. So how did you arrive at sort of this becoming the expert and becoming the center of that for Next.js?
Yeah, it's definitely a great question, and I think certainly not something I planned for. And I would say it's one of these stories where like if you go a few years back, it's kind of hard to predict that I will end up here. But if you look in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense that I ended up exactly here working on internationalization. And I guess for me, the story was always a little bit more about building open source projects. So I always found the open source community super inspiring, and following these people on Twitter and watching discussions on GitHub. And it felt like such a interesting thing to observe. And I always wanted to participate in some way. And so for most of my professional career, I've been a freelancer. And so in between projects, I usually had time to work a bit on my personal things. And I think probably quite a few developers can relate. Like when you implement a feature and then it's pretty much done, and you wake up the next day and you show up at the office and you look at your code, you'll say, yeah, I guess it kind of works, but like, now, like after all the work done, I think I could do it slightly different or maybe significantly different. And for me as a freelancer, I always worked with deadlines and budgets, of course. So in these kinds of situations, you have to differentiate, like, is it worth like refactoring more heavily, or is it like for this particular project good enough? But then like after like projects are finished, I would enjoy like contributing to open source projects, and sometimes also pursue my own ideas where you don't have this time pressure and like with this fantasy of like, I want to get it really right. Like if there are no limits, I want to get it absolutely right. And so if you dig long enough on my GitHub repository, you can find all kinds of obscure ideas with like single digit stars and whatever. But eventually one of these projects was next-intl, which was like after a few projects of setting up internationalization, always doing it differently and always in the process figuring out, okay, there's something I overlooked, but I guess we'll roll with that anyway. And so one of those projects was next-intl. And so I didn't really publish it for fame and fortune, I guess, but more like for me to use it on my next project. But interestingly, developers joined the conversation there, and they liked the approach. But they also had feature requests. So I was already working on the next project, so I would tell them like, yeah, that's a super cool idea, but I don't really have the time right now, and it's kind of hard to dedicate the time for implementing this. But if there's a company using this feature and you're really interested in this, I guess like, would you consider like hiring me a few hours for like implementing this feature? And I can still remember there was this one company from the Netherlands who actually said, yeah, we actually really like your library and we need this one particular feature. So can you build it for us? And that was just like, it felt different from what I did previously to that. So after an already busy week, I would sit down on a Friday evening, put on my favorite music, open my favorite bottle of beer and like hacking away on this feature. And it worked, and like they paid it. And I think at that point I realized something is slightly different with this project. So it felt like something to keep going. And I guess that was like the first like significant step for this project, which ultimately leads to where it is today.
It's the challenge of open source, isn't it? Largely is to be able to monetize it. So I suppose once you found the project you'd built that could then turn into an income stream of sorts, then it seemed like the best one to follow. So that makes sense. How many of those iterations did you go through to get the pattern right? Because I know there can be so many different ways to do this same thing. Have there been like multiple major versions of this, or like it sounds like you were building multiple solutions before packaging it up? How many different ways have you done internationalization before arriving at how the library works today?
Yeah, I guess like iterations, or like, let's say, ways of internationalizing an app. There were quite a few of those, but also the library went through a couple of changes. So I would say like usually about once a year, or maybe a little bit less than that, there is a major version. But luckily, I think something that worked out quite well there is like the core ideas are still quite similar to where it was like 4 or 5 years ago. So that's quite similar. But I think like one interesting aspect about the project is, for the longest time, so I always called it next-intl, but a fun fact about it is I always developed it in parallel with let's say a plain React library, but there was like a small Next.js wrapper on top. And like for the longest time, it was like 7 lines of code. So basically it was like a plain React library, but always being called next-intl. But I think the difference, what it made is, in the documentation, I could really like double down on how to use this in Next.js. So instead of giving you an instruction of how you should be using this, that you need to translate to the concepts of your framework, I could give you like a copy paste snippet that you can use in your app. And so I guess that made it a little bit more next-intl. But to answer your question, I think it was with the introduction of Next.js with the app router, and there was quite a significant paradigm shift. Like, I guess you can probably imagine what it was.
Yeah, I mean, there's some spicy takes I could make there. That is there really a difference between Next.js and React anymore? But
Right.
yeah, I think the point's well made, though, that when, and we spoke about this before we started recording, when you put documentation on Rails and like, here's a very specific solution, this is exactly how you should do this thing in the framework you're using, it makes it so much easier to specialize, where when you have to give very general guidance, it can be very difficult. And I think there's actually increasingly problematic. I'm finding this with LLMs, that if you feed it documentation that tells you it probably looks something like this and you might do something like that, LLMs will just fill in all the blanks with incorrect garbage. And so it makes it very difficult to follow. So I think more than ever, we need to be very explicit about how things work, even if that means narrowing the focus beyond what something can actually do. So it sounds like this library can do more than Next.js, but it's easiest implemented there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, so I think at the time, so the app router was released with support for server components, and that was like a major shift, because it took away some functionality which was available on the client side, which was React context. And then the other major thing was internationalized routing was previously available for the pages router, but not available anymore for the app router.
Oh, of course, that's the biggest bug with the app router, isn't it? You never know the URL that a component's being loaded on.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things. Yeah. So it felt like there are like two bigger holes here that kind of produce this void, which needs to be filled up. So of course you can implement these things on your own, but it seems to me like internationalization, at least for me, the story with internationalization is always there is this moment where you realize you missed something. And by having many conversations with people who implement internationalization, you kind of anticipate these kinds of things. And so I wanted to have an answer for these questions. And yeah, I guess that was like the biggest iteration that next-intl went through, with like providing server component support and providing routing. And there was like a quite a wild pull request. It was open for, I think, close to a year or something, with hundreds of commits and I think more than 60 people commenting there. It was kind of insane, like by the end pressing that big green merge button. But I guess that was like the biggest iteration, but also the thing that I guess like helped next-intl the most to get adopted by Next.js users, because other solutions, they didn't really have like such good answers for these questions. They would give you solutions, but like there were like kind of pieces missing, or like more the like put it together yourself. Whereas next-intl really tried to have like this solution that is flexible enough, but still like fills up this problem space for you. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so the only game in town at the time on the app router. So yeah, the result of a lot of work. That's quite amazing. Out of interest, then, would you say that the app router changed how next-intl worked, or did you just like have to implement things differently, or did you actually have to change the way it worked entirely to suit the app router? Sort of curious, which was the tail wagging the dog in this instance, I was wondering.
Yeah, so actually what I really wanted to do is I wanted to keep the existing developer experience of next-intl, but having it work for the app router, which sounds like a simple thing, but wasn't quite, due to the missing parts that I mentioned. So my initial goal was like to provide this at the same developer experience, and I think that kind of worked. But like this routing area was something completely new. I wouldn't say like it changed the library entirely, but it was more like a new piece that next-intl added to this place. But like of course, like you could always use it in client components, so like all of the existing code works for sure. But I think server components are quite an interesting technology to use for internationalization, and so that's why I wanted to have like really first-class support for it.
Would you say the library benefits from server components, or was it only pain, or was there some benefit to it as well?
No, I would certainly say so. I mean, of course, for me, like implementing it, there was quite a bit of digging through React RFCs and really understanding the details of it. But I would say for end users, it's an absolutely great thing to use, and that's also what motivated me to implement it. So, like the performance benefits of the app router are certainly something that is helpful for internationalization, I think.
Yeah, awesome. If I'm a user who needs to create an internationalized application, do you find more people come to the library with an idea of how they're going to do it? Like, this is how I want to do internationalization. Can I do it with your library? Or is it a matter of I have to look at how your library works and do it the way that your library recommends?
Yeah, I would say there's certainly both of it. So like every once in a while, I hop on a Zoom call with like this company who like uses a different tech stack, but like their internationalization needs are growing, or maybe they're using some technology that they're not happy anymore and they want to transition to the app router. So for those cases, it's a lot about like migrating all their existing structure to the app router and using next-intl. So there's not really room for the question, so have you considered doing it entirely different? So it's a lot about being flexible enough for these use cases. But I think on the other hand, you have startups which are starting out like right now, maybe even in a single language, but already think one or two steps ahead and think at some point we might want to translate our app to different languages or adapt to different markets and countries. So we want to use that, but we're not sure how to do it. So I think like giving some kind of guidance to these people and like some kind of direction which will roughly work for them is also really important.
Would you say then, if anybody's starting a project today and there's even like a slight chance that you'll be offering it in two languages, that you probably should just be using this from day one? I imagine it's difficult to implement this to a mature application compared to adding a second or a third. Like adding a third language would be significantly easier than adding the second one if you don't even have support for a first, right?
For sure. Yeah, I'm probably very biased to answer this question, but I definitely go for an internationalization from the beginning, and I also try to optimize next-intl for that case. So, like, if you want to keep things simple and don't go with crazy internationalized routing, it should be somewhat reasonably simple for you to use it, and ideally even help you simplify some pieces of your code.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from experience there. I mean, not that I was involved in the project, but I know when the Sanity studio itself required internationalization of all of the product text. I mean, that was a huge project just because it hadn't been built with that in mind from the beginning. But now it has it. We have all sorts of translations, and they've set up AI tooling and everything to automatically generate translations. It's very cool now, but getting that initial lift done was quite a huge piece of work. So what are some common misconceptions then? If you've not done internationalization before, or you've only done it a few times, is there sort of common areas that you see people trip up when it comes to implementing this?
Yeah, I guess if you're not so experienced with internationalization, there's this misconception about internationalization means translating words. And I literally put this as a headline now on the next-intl docs. Internationalization is not just translating words. So if you're a little bit more familiar with this field, you'll notice date formatting, time formatting, number formatting is another one. But it certainly goes deeper than that. So I think an important distinction to draw here is if you're implementing multilingual apps or multi-regional apps. So for example, if you take a product that's available for Canada. So in Canada, there are two natively spoken languages. There's English and then there's French. But if you compare that, for example, to Austria, so there's just one natively spoken language, which is German. But does that mean that every single person in Austria prefers to speak English or use German or use a product in German? That's actually not quite true. And if you look at websites, for example, Nike.com, they'll give you a country selection where you can pick Austria, and then they'll let you decide, do you want to use German or English? So speaking the language of a user is quite important, and there are studies which back this up, where I think 75% of people prefer to use a product in their native language, and I think 40% would never buy from a store which doesn't speak their language. So there's the multilingual aspect of it. But then there's also the multi-regional aspect, which means, so if this Canadian company transitions to the US, for example, of course, especially in e-commerce, you need to support different currencies. The legal implications might be very different. So there are changes in this regard, but it doesn't necessarily mean to use a different language. I mean, Canadian English and US English is different, but I mean, it can be a product decision to support one language, but multiple countries, right? But in the end, these two are not mutually exclusive. So you'll have apps which are both multilingual and multi-regional. So it depends on where you're going here, but you can already see, if you look a little bit under the cover, there's quite a few factors involved in finding your internationalization strategy and finding the implications for your particular product are, I think, what makes this topic really important for people to think about and implement.
I think this topic is just like saying it depends over and over and over again. It's just such a wormhole. The point on languages versus markets and regions, I know that was highlighted to me early on at Sanity when a particular Swedish music streaming service came to us and started using Sanity. And they were like, oh, we used 40 different CMSs to see if any does internationalization the way we want. And yours is the only one that did. And when they showed us what they built, I'm like, no one else is doing it like this. You're the only ones with this strategy, because to them, a market can be a collection of countries where a certain plan is available. So it's not actually geographic or language based. It's actually is that product available in those regions where we need to tailor content to those people. So there's so many dimensions to slice up content when you start digging away at this. So it's no wonder people run from this topic, but also it's at a certain scale, it has to get right for your Nikes and music streamers of the world, certainly.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah, and I guess like from my personal experience, I can also really vouch for Sanity here because I think like what's cool about Sanity is it gives you all this flexibility, like basically exactly what you said. If you have an answer to what internationalization means to you, I think Sanity can do it for you, and you can help people with common patterns. But then again, like if you have like very specific needs, I think a lot of it contributes to the fact that Sanity is code first, and basically you can do whatever you want, right? And I think for internationalization, that's a very important thing. That's also why I really like Sanity in this regard.
Yeah, I've had a hand in a lot of our internationalization plugins, but that was essentially to build like just like a best practice, like a please just do this.
Mm,
And I think our documentation sort of starts with that on that page. It's like, hey, most people use these two plugins, and that'll
mm,
do it. But the fact is, yeah, if you don't like those plugins, if that's not the way you want to do it, then
mm,
do something else. Like I'm not going to stop you. So it's good to have that best practices established for people, but then also people are free to do whatever they like, which is excellent.
mm.
And speaking of Sanity and next-intl combined, you've just released a course that puts the two of them together. Do you want to talk about like what was the inspiration to make a course out of the library that you're already creating?
Mm. Yeah, I think they were like it's basically three pillars which the course is based on. The one is I think there are, I guess you could call it misconceptions or simply knowledge gaps that people have. And then the other one is next-intl is part of an ecosystem, right? So we mentioned Sanity, but also like integrating with a translation management system. What kind of developer tooling helps you? Like this whole thing is your internationalization strategy. Like next-intl cannot deliver the whole picture for you. And then the last one, we already briefly touched on this. Internationalization is very different depending on your product or your service. So like having this conversation about all the aspects that fall into this and finding your unique solution to this problem is also what kind of the course tries to address. So based on this, the course tries to give a holistic answer to these questions. So in the end, you should walk away with like having confidence about building internationalization in your app and having an idea of what this will mean like 1 or 2 months or a year or 2 years from now and how you can expand.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, like you say, if next-intl is only playing one part of the role of putting the whole thing together, it can be
Mm,
difficult to know all the different parts to glue together. And I know
mm,
that's the tact I take with Sanity Learn is that documentation will tell you how this thing works, where
mm,
Learn will tell you how to weave all those things together to
mm.
get an end result. So, has the response to the course been good? It's been out for a few weeks now, I believe. Has it? What's the feedback been like?
Yeah, really good. Like it, yeah, I mean, it's kind of insane. You work on this thing for a long time. I honestly imagined it will take a little bit less time. So like the first estimates were like, I don't know, maybe a few months, but it turned out to be like 8 months to like really nail the subject for me and like have like a thing that feels like solid to me. And then like once you put it out, like of course, like I gave it to a lot of early testers and giving receiving feedback from them, which was very positive, which I was happy about, which also like helped me kept going and like knowing like is this a good direction. But like there is this point where you like release it and then at some point like this is something that you have to purchase. So there was certainly this situation for me like I don't know what's going to happen now. But it was like really heartwarming to me that like minutes after the release, the first sales came in, and that was kind of incredible. I think these people, it's hard to believe they read the landing page in this speed where like the first, the first course was purchased. So yeah, and the feedback is certainly good. And yeah, still like it's a thing that I want to keep updated. So like there are updates from basically different directions, but like for Next.js, there is a new feature coming up that's quite relevant for internationalization. So I'll keep it updated. And yeah, it's a fun, cool thing for me to work on now, and I really enjoy doing it.
Excellent. So you're not burned out on the topic yet. That's that's always heartening to hear. And I mean, this must be good inspiration to keep going.
Mm,
I've got to see a few lessons, the part where Sanity gets implemented, and it is very high quality. I can vouch for the quality of the course. It is it's really excellent. So I'm glad to hear that it's been a success for you so far. What's next for next-intl? Is there anything left undone? Like, is there something you've been putting off, or something you haven't been yet able to do? Have you got the the future mapped out for the library?
Yeah, certainly. I actually just tweeted, I think it was this week, about it. So like there are like three bigger features that I'm planning to work on for next-intl, two in the area of performance and one for developer experience. And the developer experience one was kind of interesting, and I tweeted about it this week with like just a short code snippet with the question, is this the tailwind of internationalization? And it was like my best performing tweet ever, and like so many people responded to it. And like the change there was that so far using translations in next-intl is a lot about like managing keys for you. And with this new feature, I'm trying to address this by basically making keys obsolete and like giving you this ability to simply use translations inline, like from your source language. So you would basically hard code it in one language, but at the same time, like opening up this flexibility to all the features that next-intl provides to you. And so next-intl is certainly not the first one to use this kind of strategy. I think Lingui is probably the most common example in this area, and they've done a fantastic job of that. And next-intl draws a lot of inspiration from this. But it seems like quite an interesting step for the library to do. So of course, like it's something that can be like incrementally adopted or like not adopted at all. Again, like depending on what your idea of internationalization is. But I think one area why it becomes increasingly important is with AI creating more and more of your code. AI has like a really limited scope or like a context that it can take into account for generating your code. And if it has to, at the same time, touch your JSON file for extracting messages there and then edit your component, like there's a lot of context pollution involved with that. But the cool thing about Tailwind is if you want to use it for styling in one component, you can use it simply in this component, right? It's basically the same problem that Tailwind solved for CSS. So previously there were like two files, like a style sheet and then the markup to touch. And with internationalization, we're kind of in the same spot. So we have the markup and then we have your JSON file with translations to touch. So now I kind of want to find a solution here which only allows you to change the code of a single component, or like in having an AI changing this code and then like benefiting from all the features that next-intl offers to you. And I think so far, like people are quite enthusiastic about that. So that's probably something I'll work on then in the near future.
That's very cool. Any removal of context switching sounds good to me, to be able to jump out of files. It's one of the best things about React is putting multiple components in a single file,
right?
As well, you know. So that's sounds good to me. Excellent. Is there anything we missed on this topic? I mean, I know this topic's so deep we could go forever, but like, is there any top level things people should know before they go and dive in and learn more and go and implement next-intl for themselves?
No, I guess we've touched on quite a few important topics, but yeah, one thing I always really like to say, like, I mean, it's really cool for me. It's the first time I'm invited to come to a podcast and speak about the internationalization, and this is still like a kind of mind blowing to me how fast the library grew, and now there's a course and speaking on a podcast. But like, I guess like I really want to thank the community, because I never really planned on being an expert on internationalization, but there's this benefit of like, if like all the conversations like come together at some point, you know, one or two things about internationalization. And there are like so many cool people who share their ideas and are open to experiment and discuss and use prototypes. So, I guess like my last word would just be like a huge thank you to everyone who has helped me or helped the project in the journey of next-intl.
Excellent. No, there's a lot to be said for following opportunity when it presents itself. You don't want to sit back and think, oh, what if I had only dug a little deeper there? If you find yourself at the center of something that's very useful, then you should definitely double down on it. So that's great. I mean, and speaking from experience, like I said, I've done some work with the internationalization plugins at Sanity. I only speak one language. I'm like the worst person to be at the company to be handling that part of the product. But that's where I found myself for some time. So yes, follow that inspiration. Anyway, Jan, thank you for joining me, and best of luck. I'll send as many people as we can to the course and to the library, and thanks for all the work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simeon. Thank you for having me.
Super.